Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony. My name is Yana Johnson, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Air Force is Wing Commander Rosemary Dyke. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria, and RSL Queensland who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the pool of reflection by visitors and students on behalf of St Luke's Anglican School Secondary Department, Bundaberg, Queensland. Please stand and join in singing the national anthem. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which he remained true, is best expressed as inscribed at the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and operations for more than a century. But first we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths of floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Private John Glennie. John Townsend Glennie was born on the 25th of April 1910 to George and Alice Glennie in Murwillumbah, just south of the Queensland border in New South Wales. His father was a stock inspector in the Tweed River, and his mother was a popular community and church worker whose efforts for the Red Cross during the war years earned her local acclaim. She died when John was only 19 years old, leaving 4 other children, George, Mary, Muriel and Dorothea. Known as Punch, John Glennie attended the prestigious King's School in Parramatta, Sydney. After leaving school, he took up employment with F.W. Stewart & Co., auctioneers in his hometown of Murwillumbah, where he was working when the war broke out in 1939. On the 22nd of October 1940, Glennie enlisted in the 2nd Australian Imperial Force. He was taken on strength with the Australian Army Service Corps as part of the Australian 8th Division. In February 1941, Glennie embarked for overseas service aboard the famous ocean liner cum troop carrier, the Queen Mary, arriving in Singapore just months later. Following Japan's entry into the war, the Japanese forces advanced quickly through the Pacific, moving towards Singapore. From mid-January 1942, the units of the 8th Division were involved in fierce fighting against the Japanese forces on the Malayan Peninsula. On the 15th of February, British forces on Singapore surrendered to the Japanese, and John Glennie was among the thousands who became prisoners of war. The Japanese soon called for working parties to build and expand new infrastructure across their empire, and from the Changi prisoner of war camp, Glennie volunteered to join the B Force. After having been assured that the better food and conditions, but soon found himself on a hellish sea journey to Borneo, crammed into a cargo hold for 11 days before arriving at Sandakan. Though initially bearable, the conditions at Sandakan deteriorated into some of the worst experienced by the prisoners of the Japanese. Prisoners, including the sick, were forced at gunpoint to work on the construction of a military airstrip and were often beaten by their captors. Illness and death ravaged the camp and food was scarce. By January 1945, the prisoners were fending for themselves. The completed airfield was soon destroyed by the Allied aircraft bombing, and between January and March of 1945, some 450 of the fittest prisoners were ordered to march west to Reno, a distance of around 260 kilometres. At this time, Glennie was suffering from malaria and not considered fit enough to leave with the rest. He died on the 15th of March 1945 as the second group was preparing to leave the camp for Reno. He was 34 years old. Today, Private John Glennie is commemorated on the memorial at the Labuan War Cemetery in Malaysia. His name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my left, among some 40,000 Australians who died while serving in the Second World War. His photograph is displayed by the Pool of Reflection. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Private John Townsend Glennie, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world. They shall not grow old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. Thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial, and we wish you a very good evening.